Mounting evidence indicates that Doctrine and Covenants section 132, the purported revelation authorizing LDS plural marriage, was conceived and created fraudulently. Let's
Robert Fotheringham is a former LDS church employee who now spends his time making videos promoting polygamy denial. In this video, he attempts to expose the earliest copy of the Revelation in DNC 132 as a forgery that was created long after the 12th of July, 1843, to frame Joseph Smith as the originator of Mormon polygamy.
If I'm wrong, better to get my ideas out there so someone can help me see where and how I'm wrong.
Well, I'm game, Rob. Are you?
consider the source document itself. The church claims that this man, Joseph C. Kingsbury, created the oldest available copy of DNC 132. As I covered previously in my video about the purported 1842 Whitney revelation on plural marriage, over time, Kingsbury materially changed his testimony regarding how the document that became DNC 132 was created.
In a previous video, Fotheringham not only tried to debunk an 1842 revelation to Newell K. Whitney, but he also attempted to cast doubt on Kingsbury's copy of DNC 132. Based on three discrepancies between Kingsbury's 1870, 1886, and 1892 reminiscences, he asserted that the revelation known as DNC 132 was created sometime after Whitney died in 1850, so that Whitney couldn't contradict the made up story involving him, and before Brigham Young presented it to the church in 1852. The first account was given 7 years after the event, when Kingsbury was 38, and the last when he was 80, nearly 50 years after he copied the Revelation. Should we be surprised to find discrepancies? No. Reminiscent accounts are, by their very nature, faulty. That's why we prefer accounts that are given closer to the event they describe. Why would we use that method if we expected all legitimate accounts to be harmonious? Of course, we don't expect that to be the case. And when we find discrepancies, we don't simply accuse people of lying. That's a ridiculous standard that none of us could pass. At any rate, let's consider the first so called discrepancy. In 1870, Kingsbury said he wrote the revelation on celestial or plural marriage from the mouth of Bishop Newell K. Whitney as he read it from the original. In 1886, he said, Bishop Newell K. Whitney handed me the revelation and asked me to take a copy of it. In 1892, I went into the room by myself and copied it. This, as we will see, is only an apparent contradiction, since both can be true, as I will discuss in a moment. For his second discrepancy, Fotheringham quotes Kingsbury's 1886 statement. I did so and then read my copy of it to Bishop Whitney, who compared it with the original. In the 1892 Temple Lot case, Kingsbury isn't clear, but Fotheringham misreads it as follows. He, Whitney, took the original and read it at the same time to see if I had made any mistakes. Fotheringham reads this last quote as saying Whitney read the original aloud as Kingsbury checked it. But he should have read a few words before, which I will now do, with an added word for clarification. And I read it aloud, and he, Whitney, took the original and read it at the same time to see if I had made any mistakes. So if Whitney was the one checking for mistakes, he was also the one listening. I don't see any contradiction. Do you, Rob? The third discrepancy involves where Hiram is in the room when he took the original and left. In 1886, Kingsbury said Hiram Smith coming into the room at the time to fetch the original, Bishop Whitney handed it to him. In 1892, he said, he, Whitney, took the one that I had made and went out to the door and handed it to Hiram Smith, who was outside of the door. In 1886, Kingsbury simply said Hiram came into the room and Whitney gave him the original. But in 1892, he gave more details. Remember, Kingsbury was 80 and under hostile cross examination. This should not be read as one does a written text. This is a transcription of a cross-examination. So some allowances need to be made to make sense of it. What did Kingsbury mean when he said Whitney went out to the door? He went out of the room to the door. What door? He begins his statement by stating, Bishop Whitney got the revelation and presented it to me and wanted me to copy it. And so I went into a room by myself, a divided place, a place that was divided. I went off in there by myself and copied it. What is this divided place? A floor plan of the ground floor of Joseph Smith's red brick store, where Whitney and Kingsbury worked, shows that there was a room within a room at the back of a large room with 3 doorways. So when Kingsbury said Whitney went out of the room to the door where Hiram was, and that he was on the other side of the door, he was describing the 2 doors at the back of the store that were close together. And so in 1886, he could say Hiram came into the room without his coming into the same room. Fotheringham also focuses on some internal inconsistencies in the 1892 statement. And just as I got through the copying of it, Hiram Smith came in and wanted the revelation. The original revelation was what he wanted. From the remainder of the statement, we learn that he was not quite finished. So he clarified himself, which is what everyone does. More accurately, he should have said, just as I got nearly through the copying of it. The remainder reads, He came in the room to see how I got along with it. That is, Bishop Whitney did. And then he went out and told Hiram Smith that he would hand him the revelation in a few minutes, for I was not quite through the copying of it. Well, when I got through making the copy, I took the one I had made myself and read it aloud, and he, Whitney, took the original and read it at the same time to see if I had made any mistakes and that it was correct. And when he found that it was all correct, he took the one that I had made and went out to the door and handed it to Hiram Smith, who was outside the door ready to take it. Fotheringham notes that this makes it sound like Whitney gave Hiram Kingsbury's copy, but he clearly stated that Hiram had come for the original. And later, he states that he saw the copy he made a second time on the same day. So he certainly knew which one had been taken. He may have simply misspoke. Nevertheless, even if we allowed Fotheringham his discrepancies, would it mean that Kingsbury invented his account of copying the revelation? No, of course not. One should keep in mind that Fotheringham apparently has no problem dealing with discrepancies in multiple accounts of Joseph Smith's first vision. But if an old man, after 50 years, switches a few details around, he's certainly a liar. Right, Rob?
And yet, in Kingsbury's inconsistent accounts, he consistently claimed that he alone copied the entire revelation. Let's consider evidence that this too was a lie. The Kingsbury document, as it's called, consists of nearly 8 pages of handwritten text, shown here. It seems that, upon inspection, the entire document does not appear to have been created by the same person. Of the approximately 7 3/4 pages of total manuscript text, the first 7 1/4 pages appear to have been written by one person using brown ink, and the last half page of text appears to have been written by a different person using black ink.
The brown ink is iron gall ink, where the iron has oxidized or rusted. So at most, we can only say that different inks were possibly used, but it may be that the lines of the second part are thinner and less oxidized and not necessarily different ink. He may have simply sharpened his quill. Does this mean that the 2 sections were written by different scribes, as Fotheringham will argue? Of course not.
So let's take a look at the last page, page 8, because it's here that the anomalies begin to show up. This is a close-up of page 8. At the top of the page, we note that the ink is brownish in color. In the first 5 lines, we see similar, consistently sized and shaped letters. But on the 6th line, we see an abrupt transition right after the paragraph sign identified in the red box to what looks like a different color of ink, in this case black ink, as well as a new writing style that is noticeably smaller in size that uses much finer lines compared to the brown text above. Clearly, some type of break or change occurred in the creation of the document.
The paragraph mark and other editorial marks were made by those who published the revelation in the Deseret News in 1852 under the direction of Willard Richards. Obviously, there was, as Fotheringham notes, some type of break or change in the creation of the document. And Kingsbury provides a very plausible explanation that Fotheringham wants to dismiss as a post 1850 creation. The Joseph Smith Papers editors have this to say: there is a significant shift in the handwriting style at this point, likely reflecting Kingsbury's rushing to finish the copy. Kingsbury recollected later in his life that his work of copying the Revelation was interrupted by Hiram Smith, who came in and wanted the Revelation. Noel K. Whitney came in to see how I got along with it, and then he went out and told Hiram Smith that he would hand him the Revelation in a few minutes, for I was not quite through the copying of it. The signs of being rushed are there: the sudden lack of a margin, the use of ampersands, and mistakes. I would also suggest that after he told Hiram it would be a few more minutes, Whitney returned to the room and read the original aloud to help speed Kingsbury's copying along. This would explain how Kingsbury could say in 1892 that he went into the room alone, but in 1870 that he wrote the revelation from the mouth of Bishop Noel K. Whitney as he read from the original. Nevertheless, Fotheringham does his best to convince us that the smaller writing is not Kingsbury's writing.
So, as we compare the brown text above the line against the black text below it, which was all supposedly written by the same person, some interesting differences emerge. For example, consider the shape of the letter Y in the words by and my on the first line of text, as well as in the word justify on the second line. Each letter Y has a long, thick tail, which is also present in a second occurrence of the word justify identified in the next line below. The author's formation of the letter Y with a long, thick tail appears to be consistent. Contrast that with the shape of the final letter Y in the word adultery in the red circle below the blue line. The same letter Y, used at the end of a word, supposedly written by the same person, is much smaller and without the characteristic thick tail we see in the text above the blue line. It's possible this might have been influenced by the author changing his writing instrument.
That's probably part of it. A close examination of the two areas of writing shows that there is no significant difference between the two in forming the final letter Y. Compare Farthingham's examples from above the blue line with those from below. They both show a darkening of the tail. He shows the word adultery, but look at these others. There's no significant difference, Rob.
Consider also the shape of the letter J. In the brown text above the blue line, we see that the initial J's used in the two instances of the word justify are formed consistently. Compare those two initial J's with the initial J in the word justified below the line. We can see that the J below the line is significantly smaller and has no lowered loop like the two J's above the line.
Perhaps that is because Kingsbury was writing smaller and faster. However, when he slows down to make a correction, there is clearly a loop in his letter J. Another miss, Rob. However, notice that none of the examples of the initial J on either side of the blue line have an expected upstroke at the beginning, which seems like a significant similarity to me.
Consider another difference in letter shape between the brown and black ink portions of the document. The name Abraham appears often in section 132. Here, on the first page of the document, in brown ink, we see the capital A in the word Abraham is shaped like a pointed triangle. That same letter shaping pattern continues throughout the brown ink portion of the document. On page 4, we see these four examples demonstrating consistency in the writing of the letter A at the beginning of the word Abraham. And here on page 5, we see the same pointy triangle style in these 6 highlighted examples of the name Abraham. So now we have a pretty good idea of how the writer consistently formed the capital A at the beginning of the name Abraham. That's why this excerpt in black ink from the last portion of the document is significant. In both instances that the name Abraham appears in the black ink portion of the document, identified here in the yellow circles, the capital A in the name Abraham is rounded and not the pointed triangle style used throughout the brown ink portion of the document.
By focusing solely on the name Abraham, Fotheringham makes it appear that the style of the capital letter A is different in the first part from that in the last part. But that is an artificial and misleading limitation. The fact is that both styles, the so called pointed A and round A, appear in both parts and are identical. Here is a shot of page 6 that shows both styles of the capital letter A. Another example of this is found on page 7. Both styles of A can also be found in the second part. And here is a comparison of the two types of A in both parts of the document. So when the complete data are considered, it appears to support Kingsbury as the scribe of both parts. I hope you are following this, Rob.
In addition to handwriting differences, there's also a structural difference that seems important. In the red circles, you can see the word and, which appears frequently throughout the whole document. In these examples from the brown ink portion of the document, note the similarity in how the writer formed the word and with a final D that curves back to the left. This style appears consistently throughout the first part or brown ink portion of the document. Throughout the first or brown ink portion of the document, the word and appears just over 200 times. In every single one of those instances, the word and is spelled out. And that's why the contrast with the approach used in the last or black ink section of the document is so significant. Back on the last page, below the blue line, in the black ink section, the word and appears 22 times. But in the black ink section with the new handwriting style, the writer almost never wrote out the word and using the letters A and D. Instead, he used a symbol that represents the word and, which is a handwriting variation of the ampersand character, in at least 20 of those 22 instances. In the first or brown ink section of the document, 100% of the 201 instances of the word and were written out using the letters A and D, while in the last or black ink section, in 20 out of 22 instances, the writer did not write out the word and, but instead used the ampersand symbol. This is the last portion of the last page, written in black ink in the new handwriting style. You can see that the writer consistently uses the ampersand in place of spelling out the word and in all but two instances. The first is this one, in which it appears the ampersand may have been used originally, but then someone edited the document by apparently writing the word A and D in very small, crowded letters over the top of the ampersand. The last one is the only instance in the last or black ink portion of the document where the word and is unambiguously written out using the letters A and D. Note the conspicuous absence of the backward curving D at the end of this instance of the word and. It seems highly unlikely that the same copyist would employ a consistent pattern of spelling out the word and 200 times, and then, after changing his ink color, pen tip, and most importantly his overall handwriting style, use the ampersand symbol instead of spelling out the word in at least 20 of the next 22 instances.
We have already discussed that the probable reason for the nearly consistent use of ampersands in the last section instead of writing out and was to save space, and that this is consistent with the smaller writing with no margins. Well, we don't have examples of ampersands in the first part of the document to compare them to. We have these examples from Kingsbury's Overland Journal in the BYU's Special Collections, which are exact matches. Fotheringham attempts to distinguish the two types of styles of writing by observing that Kingsbury consistently ended and with a final D that curves backward, while the one and that begins the sentence in the last portion has a D that ends with a downward stroke. This is just a coincidence. Again, Fotheringham is artificially limiting his comparison to the word and, but it is quite clear that he wrote with both kinds of D endings. Moreover, one can easily find examples of and that look just like the one in the smaller writing at the end of the Revelation document in his journal at BYU. It should be obvious that Fotheringham doesn't really know what he's doing. Instead of looking for differences and imposing artificial limitations, he could have simply looked for unusual similarities. For example, note the similarity between the formation of the capital letters B, G, and A. Especially distinctive is the loop at the beginning of the V and W. There's no doubt that Kingsbury pinned both. None, which is a serious blow to Fotheringham's attempt to discredit Kingsbury's copy of D&C 132. We have seen that the document is consistent with Kingsbury's claim about it, and that there is no reason to substitute his explanation with a highly speculative theory that dates it to between 1850 and 1852. The gentleman who goes by RFM has shown quite convincingly that all the major elements of D&C 132 were verified in the Nauvoo Expositor of June 7, 1844, including the part that mentions espousing 10 virgins in the last section. This is crucial because we know that Kingsbury left Nauvoo about 10 days later on the 25th of July and didn't return until July 28th, 1844. So, Rob, you might think about something you once said.
What you think happened may not have happened.
Indeed.